All right. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining me on this fabulous Friday. I hope you've had a good day, not uh, too much learning already, and you're ready to learn a little bit more. In the next hour, I'm going to be talking about using Gmail and Calendar with your classes, some different ways that you can use them, as well as show you some practical ways that they can actually learn how to use the tools as well. So we'll start out with emailing, and then we will move into calendar afterwards. So something I've been learning a lot going around working with the teachers in our division for the past number of weeks in grades 4 to 6 is that kids are not being explicitly taught how to email. And I've noticed with my own children that they don't seem to have those skills. And even in helping my 15-year-old with some things, we got into his email and noticing that he had been getting a lot of communications from his teachers and from his school, but he isn't even checking that email. And it got me to thinking, wow, why doesn't he use it? I know in my adult life I'm using email all the time, whether it's actually, my email program, or I'm filling out some form on a website and I'm essentially emailing a company or another person. And I thought it would be really good to think about and then talk with teachers and about some ways that we could be explicitly teaching Gmail or email in our classes, and helping kids gain those communication skills that we know they're certainly going to need, and they could be using them right now in class too. So there are 4 billion daily email users. That's a huge number, of course, but the point here really just speaks to how important this skill is. And even though it doesn't necessarily pop up in the curriculum, we see it now on the grade 9 PAT. And students, whether they're in elementary or junior high or high school, they probably have some reasons that they could be using email that they maybe aren't already. And again, just giving them that real world experience. And it really comes down to teaching them how to communicate with different audiences, as well as just being able to use that application, whether it be on a Chromebook or their phone, etc. too. So a really great place to start with your students is the Applied Digital Skills from Google for Education. This has been around for some time, but they've really put a lot of resources into creating like new lessons and projects for students in the last few years. There's 210 different projects or lessons in there that students can do, and some of them are short, like these examples here on this screenshot, or the shorter, like sort of single 45 to 90-minute lessons. They always have sort of a shorter chunk of a lesson, and then there's some extensions there where that could be pushed out to that 90 minutes. And you can get into this. I actually have some links further on in the slides presentation that I will make sure I pop the link in the chat for you after also, so that you can get a hold of those. But I've got links to some specific email and calendar lessons, as well as some projects in there that either include both or one of those, along with maybe some other Google skills too. So Gmail and calendar certainly aren't the only lessons in there. There's lots of Google Drive stuff on the slides, docs, etc. And like I said, some of their projects definitely incorporate more than one of the Google tools. So that's a really great place that you can go find some stuff that you can just share out directly with your class. The lessons are all self-guided and walk them through some videos and creation of things. So that's really cool too. We're also working on putting some of those into some division classrooms. So if you have been on our digital citizenship ones, or maybe the Breakout EDU ones, those or division classrooms that we create, that you can copy the whole thing or reuse posts with your own Google Classrooms. So we're aiming to do the same thing with the Applied Digital Skills, just to help teachers a little bit with some of that organization along the way. And we can curate some of that stuff and sort it out into some topics there, just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to use too. But don't wait on us. Feel free to check that out at any time and start using those with your students right away. And then, like I said, I've got some specific lessons linked onto this slides presentation for that too. So specifically talking about email and just some really basic practical use suggestions in the classroom for getting your kids using email in sort of a real world way would be to be possibly doing weekly or daily agenda emails to parents. I notice when I go around to sites, we don't see a lot of the physical paper agendas in use anymore. Some elementary classrooms are still toting those back and forth every day. Google Classroom will send your parents sort of email synopses of what's happening within Google Classroom, but it's not really a good way or easy way for you to communicate things like those weekly and daily updates and reminders. So that could be something that you could add into your daily lessons at the end of the day, and that time that would be agenda time, or maybe in some language arts time, to have the students sending their parents emails about things that are happening in the classroom, reminders to sign permission forms. We have an event next week and all that kind of good stuff. Another thought might be to have some random acts of kindness emails. You could choose maybe students within your school, or have students choose staff members to send a nice little note to. That would be a good way to practice. Sending an email to someone, as well as working on some nice empathy skills, and again, communicating in a specific way. Classroom reminders and updates, really similar, I guess, to weekly, daily agendas and emails. But I was thinking in this, as far as you as a teacher, could be emailing students. So even though you probably talked about something at the front of the class or whatever, you could be sending the kids a daily or a weekly email with, hey, remember this morning we talked about whatever, or tomorrow your science project is due, and those kinds of things. So just, you know, basic day-to-day communication between yourself and students, understanding, of course, that could become really difficult to manage with a large student load. So perhaps it's, group messages to your class, or reaching out to different students at different times or whatever. You can encourage your students always to email you if they have questions or things, that would be an appropriate way to communicate. I know that was one of the things I was surprised when my son was home due to medical reasons, and I had just said, "Well, email your teacher and ask," and he was, like, sort of shocked when I asked him to do that, and it just, again, to the point that he hasn't learned and doesn't recognize email as a useful tool, and had to talk to him. Well, how do I email her? Well, say hello, Mrs. So and so, and type out what you want to ask. And so I think just encouraging your students that could be a way that they can reach out to you too, would be a good life lesson for them to learn, and communicating with you will help them communicate with others down the line as well. And then sending out, sort of formal invites or whatever to parents or other special guests that you would like to invent for school events, and maybe even parent teacher interviews. Your students could do some of the communicating on that for you. So there are some third-party programs that you can sign up for online that will allow you to do ePals with a class around the world. One specifically is called ePals. It's been around for a long time, and some of the feedback on it is that it can take some time, your time, to find a class to communicate with on there. But that if you once you've invested that time and you find an appropriate class somewhere, and then get in touch with that teacher through the ePals site, you those experiences your students could have communicating with students somewhere else in the world, can be really valuable, and might just be worth the time that it takes to go through the massive amount of users on the site, get your profile and things set up, and then work on finding someone for your class to work with. Maybe you could talk to a local senior citizens home in our community and set up doing ePals with seniors. I know through the COVID shutdowns, when everybody was locked up, there was a lot of technology brought into different seniors facilities and things to make it easier for the people living there to stay in touch with their loved ones outside. So having an email program with some seniors would be a really great way to have your students practice their email skills too, and then maybe emailing for a cause to something like a government body or in support of a charity would be some other examples that you could use email with your classes. Definitely could connect into some language arts or social or health even possibly too. So the big 2 things, with emailing with students, it's, it's like I say, it's not necessarily a curricular outcome, and there's 2 big pieces. One is learning how to use the tool, basic what composing messages and replying, the really basic stuff, maybe into some more expanded use of the specific tool. But then there is the communication piece, that is really, really important, I think. I know these kids are growing up in a world where a lot of their communication is happening via sort of a text message fashion. And I think we're seeing a loss of a lot of the longer written communication. There's definitely time and place that kids are developing a whole new language that will probably become commonplace, but there are always places for the written word, fully written words and sentences. They will need to do professional communications at some point in their life. So learning to write properly in email and considering your audience is a really huge piece. There's a lesson, one of the first lessons in the Applied Digital Skills on email talks to students about audience. And the basic gist of the assignment is they have won an award and they are going to communicate about this award they've won. And one is a text message they would send to their friend. And then how would they text their parent? And then finally, how would they email their teacher? And so the lesson, of course, goes through and talks about those different levels of communication and how what you would text to your friend, is very different than what you might formally send to your teacher, inviting them to come and see you be presented with this award that you've won. So that's just an example of that practical application. They're using the tools. I mean, it's really explicit about what they need to do in there, but then on the other side of it, they're also talking a lot about communication and thinking about your audience, and that's really good to help the kids, you know, practice those skills. And like I said, it's explicitly taught and they're self-guided. The YouTube videos are nice and short. So there's a little YouTube video and then there's some instructions for something for the students to do. You can launch it out with the kids or just take that stuff and teach it to them yourself too. So I'm going to just now jump over to just a few actual Gmail tips. This could be for you or your students, that can help make your life just a little bit easier when you're using Gmail. And then some of the things that you might want to explicitly show your class about using the application, also. So just want to get out of this for now. The inbox organizing, I think by default, when you go into Gmail, this isn't open. And this is actually nice to be able to see all of your labels and things. Labels can be handy for your students to further sort and organize things. But again, when you're really just basically getting in, they need to know how to compose. They need to know how to reply to a message. Probably conversations around, is it appropriate to apply all to a message? When is that something that we should do? I find even sometimes adults aren't 100% sure of that. So we could have those conversations with them as well. Other tip, this was what I wanted to go into all of the settings for. I threw myself off completely. So up top, I didn't point it out before we jumped in here, was the labels, these ones. When you select an email, more buttons pop up top. And by default, these are actually little icons. So if you're brand new to email, those icons likely don't mean anything to you. So that is something that can be changed in all of the settings. Right here under button labels. So by default, that's set to icons. if we set them to text, they will look like I had. I'll just actually change them. Oh, and you have to always save your changes when you're in your Gmail settings also. So it gave me that nice little warning that I didn't save those changes, but it let me exit. Change those back to icons and save. So as I say, the students, you may have them, I'm going through some certain things in there and seeing there's a lot of settings, but that one changes, like I said, these little guys. So that's what it's like as icons. You can hover over them and still see what they say. Personally, I really like to have them on text. That makes it easier for me. So that was one of the little tips that there was there on that slide that I was showing before I jumped into the actual Gmail that I'll share with you after, that you could use with your students as well if you like. Again, I always have to save changes. Excuse me. When I'm working on my settings in my Gmail. I'm going to jump back to this for 1 minute. Labels, buttons, and the text. Do you guys have any questions specifically about that? Because I definitely got a little bit messed up there. No questions, Patrick. Thanks. I've got my camera not where my meat is, so when I turn to look at you, I'm not actually looking at you anymore. All right, moving right along, I'm going to talk a little bit about Google Calendar. I think I might be done early. My forms session was quick too. So I think even less than Gmail would be Google Calendar usage. Generally with students, it's not a place they need to go. They may or may not know that their Google Classroom stuff is appearing there automatically because they don't necessarily have a reason to access it. And if you're not using it with your class, they've probably never even just been on there. Yet I think, again, just like with email, keeping your life organized in a calendar is a real life adult skill, whether you're in a job like I work in where there's lots of online meetings and I'm scheduling things all over the place. Of course, the calendar is the first place I go every day. It's the last place I am at the end of the day. That's really normal for lots of work schedules. It also applies to personal life. You may have hockey practices and other things that are all in your world that you need to make sure that you stay on top of as well. And same goes for the students. So again, it doesn't fit in the curriculum somewhere. It's not explicitly stated. Students should learn to use these skills. I think moving away from the daily agenda potentially has actually been a bit of a detriment just as far as that calendar and scheduling sort of things goes for kids. So Google Calendar would be an even more natural place to have a sort of a daily agenda. Students could invite parents to events that are created in Google Calendar as needed so that they could see that what was there as well. You can even create a class calendar with a publishable link that could be sent to parents where they could open it up and they'd be able to see everything that's going on in that class calendar all the time too. So like with all things Google, it gives you that ability to not only work on it together, like within the organization, to then also share outside. So like I said, daily agenda, potentially having that class calendar, that could be something that you have different groups of students working on at different times. It could be, like your job for the week is to populate our classroom calendar and make sure all of the important information that our parents need to see, or maybe other people in the school need to see things that your class is doing. You could use appointment slots. That could be on your end, to set up conferences with your students. I don't know how your school schedules parent-teacher interviews, but if you are on your own for scheduling those, actually appointment slots in Google Calendar could be really useful too. And then When I mentioned it already, but when you set up a Google Classroom, there's always a Google Calendar also created for that Google Classroom. So whether you use it or not specifically, it is there. It's been created for you and all of your students, and then also added into your Google Calendar app. And so that's, I mean, that can be really handy, especially if you're using due dates on assignments, because they're just automatically going to pop up in Google Calendar that those are assignments are due that day. So even if that was the only use, was that you just were started using due dates on stuff that you're posting in Google Classroom, and then drawing your students' attention to that it's there in Google Calendar, and that would be giving them some of those skills in a fairly less impactful way to your own schedule, and figuring out how to try and fit this in with everything else. So those are some of my ideas. And I should say my ideas also ones that I came across in my Google searching, seeing how other people in other places were doing these things with students. It was interesting to me too when I did that I didn't find as many great ideas and things out there as I may on if I searched up using Google Slides with students, would find way more results than I found for Calendar and Gmail. Again, just sort of reflective on, wow, these are real world skills that kids need to, and we need to try and find a place for them. Like I say, with all of the other stuff going on too. I like that the calendar can give some reminders as well. You can have those set up so that you're getting, the students could be getting email reminders right from calendar for homework that's due and things like that also. So really practical use for calendar. My three tips for this one, and I'm just going to actually just stay on my little gift screen for a second while I look at these, because as soon as I go away, I won't remember them anymore. Three top tips when you're a new user to Google Calendar. By default, it puts you in the day agenda view, which is great if you're a business person with a million meetings a day. I personally like the month view, but that's the first time you jump in. If you change that drop down toggle at the top where it says day to one of the other options there, that'll always be what your calendar view is when you come in. So whether the weekly view is better if you have lots of things in there for your classroom, that might be appropriate. I think oftentimes the month at a glance is a great view. And then also there's some options to toggle the weekends off, and also you can even set up like a custom view if you wanted to not use one of the ones that they have there by default. Setting up events. This is quick and easy. Click on any day. The reminders and tasks is a great way to set something in your calendar. Your students could do that too. And then again, it would be that practical use. Oh, well, go put a reminder in your Google Calendar for that. And then if you have students in the habit of, opening it every morning, or there's a set time in the day where you check the calendar, see what's upcoming, make sure you plan sort of like that agenda time, like I said about email too. And then a little bit further, which is just drawing your attention to the different calendars on the side. So there's all those Google Classroom calendars that were automatically created when I made a Google Classroom. They're there for the students as well. And then most often you're wanting to toggle things off if you're like me and you have a whole bunch of Google Classrooms. Um, and then if you click on the little three dots, that's how you can just like nail down so that you're just working in one calendar. So that changes your view. So you're only looking at that calendar, which is handy. But it's also, if you're setting up events that need to go on a different calendar, that just makes it by default that it's going to go on the one that you're looking at also. Now I want to talk about the Google Classroom integrations, and we'll actually jump over to Google Classroom for that. Um, and just one note, with these Google Classroom calendars that you have within the calendar app, if you create something in Google Classroom with a due date, it always goes back to calendar. But if you create an event in calendar, it does not push through to the Google Classroom version of that calendar. So we'll just have a look at what that looks like on this one. Oh, I closed him this way on this one. So actually, I should have showed from the classes page first. Oh no, they're not on the classes page. On the class work page is the little link to the Google Calendar. So this is the same for your students. They would have this link here, but this is linking to the actual version of Google Calendar on here. Oh, no. And then in this view, this is linking to the calendar that's within Google Classroom. So this is where if you create an event on the Google Calendar, it doesn't come back to this view of the calendar. So if you go in here, you're not going to see things that if you know field trip forms do that you added over here. It's not going to appear on this view of the calendar. But if you go from that first spot within the class, from the classwork page, where you see the link and your students see the link, that actually opens up to the Google Calendar app. So that's kind of one of the weird things with Google Classrooms that's got this key calendar here. This is handy for you because it's only your Google Classroom calendars. By default, it's showing you all of your stuff, so you could en masse see all of your assignments. High school students have 4 different teachers at a time. This would be a place where they could see all of their work due in one place or whatever, just that Google Classroom specific stuff. And as I said, everything that has a due date will appear here. If it has a time on it, it will actually appear with the time on Google Calendar. Back on this version, they're always appearing as a big wide banner. And I think that's actually probably all I had to say about that. I'm gonna just, well, not quite all I had to say. Why did I close that? Might have. Pop this one back open. I closed my presentation that I want to share with you guys with the links. There it is. All the way to the end. So this is this page that I was talking about at the beginning with the different applied digital skills lessons that I pulled out that specifically go over whether these ones, obviously Gmail, just there's a few lessons for just learning about calendar, and then there's several lessons and a couple bigger projects that have them using a combination of Google Calendar, Gmail, and then also some Google Docs and other things too. I thought these were really cool, actually. These, especially the longer term projects, they definitely are applicable to your other subject areas. They're working on writing skills and reading skills and communication and things, problem solving. Some of it can be group work. And in addition to that, they're practicing and using these other Google skills too. So I'm just going to close this and share with you guys this link. I'm actually going to